It's July of 2024, and SeaWorld has just opened 2 new coasters in Florida. Just to clarify, SeaWorld Entertainment was also recently renamed to United Parks and Resorts, but for the sake of this video, when I refer to SeaWorld, I'm also talking about the Busch Gardens parks as well. So SeaWorld Orlando premiered Penguin Trek, a launched family coaster in the Antarctica section of the park, and Busch Gardens Tampa opened Phoenix Rising, a family suspended coaster in the area known as Pantopia. What's interesting is SeaWorld's pivot towards adding family attractions, because otherwise, their parks have stood out for their larger, more intense coasters. In the past, this really works well for Busch Gardens Tampa, which actually reasonably competed with Disney in the 90s through both its unique African theme and with standout coasters Kumba and Montu. At the time, while Busch Gardens had many offerings for families, it was the only park in Florida to offer this level of thrill, which was really important in distinguishing itself from Disney and the recently opened Universal Studios Florida. SeaWorld was also doing pretty well because no one else in Orlando was trying to compete with their animal shows, but 1998 introduced the highly themed Journey to Atlantis, which was followed by Kraken in 2000, which I believe might have been a response to the Hulk and Dueling Dragons at Islands of Adventure. From this point, Busch and SeaWorld parks would invest in the occasional coaster, which were well thought out in terms of layout and often had great theming, putting them above what you might see from Six Flags. However, after 2008, when Anheuser-Busch was incorporated into InBev and the parks were sold off, they had a rocky next decade with no clear leadership, as they were passed around by different owners and hit pretty hard by Blackfish. I have an older video where I chronicle the corporate drama that has destroyed SeaWorld if you're interested in more information on that, but essentially, the 2010s were a mixed period for the parks where they tried to continue honoring their legacy by building well-themed rides, which also included family attractions with varying degrees of success. Some of these projects were great, some were disasters, and most were just kind of okay. Coasters were still being built at this time, but by 2019, they became the primary focus of the company, which was not helped when Hill Path Capital stepped in and bought a controlling interest in May of that year. From that point forward, SeaWorld parks have been run with the Six Flags playbook, essentially only focusing on coasters and thrill rides while cutting staffing to the bone. Coasters are often running single trains with incredibly slow staff, which in fairness, I understand that they don't get paid enough to care, but this results in lines being far longer than they ever should be. Recently, the parks have also cut staff from the parking lot to direct traffic, and so now that process is just utter chaos. You may have missed that they now have surcharges hidden in the price when you buy food or merchandise, and that actual base prices are often misleading, or you'll find that they're higher than what is posted when you get to a register. Hill Path Capital is counting on the thrill of coasters to bring people in, while squeezing every last cent out of these parks through hidden charges and cutting staff and maintenance to the point of barely operating. The extreme cost cutting has also even resulted in a coaster without a station, as we saw with 2022's Emperor at SeaWorld San Diego. That's why I'm pretty mixed on the 2 new coasters that just premiered in Florida, because they have great family layouts with decent theming, which I thought that the company had pretty much given up on. I've been pointing out for a while now that SeaWorld parks would be really strong as family destinations that happen to have great coasters, rather than just existing exclusively as thrill parks, and while these new additions aren't too exciting on the surface, they really are great for a family demographic. Still, while these should be positive additions to their parks, they are unfortunately plagued with poor operations, and even in my experience with Penguin Trek, I noticed a serious fire hazard as operations barricaded off emergency exit doors to force you to wait in another line to see the penguin exhibit while trying to exit the ride. These coasters should be a win for SeaWorld, but are held back by awful park management. So today, let's talk about these experiences and discuss everything that's holding them back. Just a quick favor, but videos like this take a lot of time and money to produce, so if you'd like to help me out, you can do so by just leaving a like. In 2013, SeaWorld Orlando opened Antarctica Empire of the Penguin, a trackless dark ride that puts you into the role of Puck, a young penguin exploring the harsh environment of Antarctica. The ride had you skating around an ice cave, trekking through the harsh wind, and having a dangerous encounter with a hungry seal, before then revealing windows into the penguin exhibit which then unloaded riders into that area. The penguin exhibit is great, so incorporating the ride into the experience was a pretty neat novelty that helped SeaWorld stand out from its competitors, but ultimately, the ride was pretty forgettable. There were some elements that were cool, such as when the vehicle slid and danced on the ice, but the ride was otherwise really light on substance. Still, this experience seemed to be a huge hit with families, and while yes, its poor capacity was a factor in driving its wait times pretty high, it still had a valuable place in a park that really needs more family attractions among its coasters. After the park reopens from the 2020 shutdown, the ride never reopened, and it's a pretty well-known secret that because SeaWorld did not operate the ride for months, this resulted in major irreparable damage to the vehicles that I had heard was related to issues with the batteries. While the ride was not operating for a few years, at least the penguin exhibit was accessible, and then rumors started swirling about a replacement, which at the time I had heard was a straddle-style jet ski coaster, similar to Wavebreaker at SeaWorld San Antonio. While I think that this rumor was conflated with 2023's Dart Coaster for Busch Gardens Williamsburg, I was excited for the idea of an Intamin straddle coaster, and to my surprise, it was revealed that SeaWorld Orlando would be getting a B&M instead. It was soon evident that this coaster would reuse some of the former Empire of the Penguin building and would be intended for families. However, as track went up, I lost interest, thinking that it looked really mediocre and unremarkable. Still, I was curious to experience it, and went for a pass holder preview, where I've now discovered that this is actually a fantastic and fun addition to the park that is appealing to a younger audience or for those who are less able to endure intense thrills. Walking in, the queue is designed to look like a research station, which ties in with the theming of the quick service restaurant and the gift shop right outside, which themselves are remnants from the original version of Antarctica. While the theming inside the queue isn't fantastic, it's a lot better than what we've seen from SeaWorld over the past 5 or 6 years. I had rock bottom expectations for this, so it's nice to see a little bit of placemaking in an indoor air-conditioned queue. After heading up the stairs, you cross over the station, which again, while not exceptional, is better themed than I expected from SeaWorld. The train has rows that seat 2 across, which I disagree with for a family coaster. I think this should be 4 across, but the seating is otherwise perfectly designed with an overhead lap bar, allowing more skittish riders to feel comfortable but still a little exposed, which I believe is a new seating style for B&M. As the train dispatches from the station, it moves through ice caverns where you witness a snowmobile on your right, and a screen with penguins jumping into the sea on your left. With warning signs for a drop and falling ice, the coaster dips into the dark as strobes and an audio cue simulate a little bit of peril, and rounding a corner to the left through some additional caverns, the music ramps up as you launch outside. From here, the coaster travels over the path and into a spaghetti bowl behind the Antarctica area, and while the layout doesn't look particularly remarkable, especially as it doesn't have any inversions, the coaster is wonderfully fast and whippy, with the experience a bit more intense than it appears. The coaster has 2 launches, both of which are decently forceful for this level of thrill, and finishing the course at the final brake run, we then return back to the station as triumphant music plays. By the end, I was surprised by how deceptively fun this layout is, and in conjunction with the themed indoor queue, this is a great experience for younger children or more timid riders, fitting that need for another family attraction in the park perfectly. However, where I have issues is of course with the operation, and one of SeaWorld's largest is the lack of employees designating rows for riders, resulting in the chaos that you see on the platform here. The lack of organization on the platform drives up wait times considerably, so I have to imagine that outside of previews, this is likely going to be a mess that makes getting on the ride a lot more difficult than it needs to be. At the time I rode, the loading team was moving pretty quickly though, and the coaster had 2 trains, so at least while the ride is still new, it is dispatching fairly efficiently. The real issue came when exiting the ride though, as while it's cool that you get a look into the penguin exhibit, which I believe is in the same location as where you saw the penguins from the former ride, you were then forced into the ice caverns of the previous queue, and now have to wait in another line to exit the building through the penguin exhibit. At first, I thought I had missed an exit and, so walking back, asked a team member how to leave, but was aggressively told that I needed to exit through the penguin exhibit. I then witnessed that team member walk down through the caverns, move a barricade that was placed in front of an emergency exit door, and make their way directly outside right near the actual ride exit. By this point, the caverns had filled up more as people who queued just to see the exhibit were being merged in with people exiting the coaster, and finally being let out into the penguin viewing area, I had to push my way through a crowd of people who were condensed into this tiny space. Previously, you exited the exhibit through a revolving door in case the penguins jumped out, which apparently happens pretty often, but now the vestibule has been replaced with 2 sliding doors. To exit, everyone packs into this small area, while a stressed and aggressive team member yells at people outside to stay away from the door and wait behind the blue line, which was just a piece of tape that was barely visible, as it looked to be ripped up by thousands of shoes scuffing the floor. After about 15 minutes of trying to leave, and wondering whether I should seriously consider contacting the Orlando Fire Marshal, I exited through the gift shop, with the otherwise great coaster experience having taken a bizarre turn, where I wasn't allowed to leave the building, and needed to fight my way through a crowd of people to see the penguins, even though this is literally a feature of the exit queue already, and these two things should absolutely be separate. The idea of having the ride let out into the exhibit is inherently pretty cool, but forcing you to wait in another line to experience it, while also creating a fire hazard, is absolutely stunning mismanagement from the park. On a more positive note, let's head over to Busch Gardens Tampa and into Pantopia, where the park has introduced Phoenix Rising. In 1980, Timbuktu opened as a themed area of the park with a dolphin show and a few flat rides, as well as Scorpion, the second coaster in the park at the time. In 1984, the park added the Phoenix, an inverted swinging ship manufactured by Intamin that I'm sure thrilled many park guests. By the time I was old enough to experience it, its popularity had waned as the park was full of massive coasters, but due to rumored technical issues and a general lack of interest, the ride stopped operating sometime in 2018. It was then demolished in 2022, followed by the park's Wild Mouse Sand Serpent in 2023. Immediately, Busch Gardens began land clearing for a new coaster in this area, and like SeaWorld, I certainly did not expect a B&M family coaster. When speaking about Phoenix Rising, which is obviously in the spirit of the Phoenix, what struck me as odd was that this was announced as another inverted coaster like Montu, which at the time seemed like the wrong decision. Sure, it was a smaller family version of a B&M invert, but it's important for coaster parks to have distinctly different coaster types that contrast with one another. You have your sit-down looper with Kumba, your dive coaster with SheiKra, Cheetah Hunt speed-focused layout, a moderately thrilling classic coaster with Scorpion, Tigress's powerful launching circuit, a family spinning coaster with Cobra's Curse, and of course, the inverted Montu. I was skeptical at first, and while it maybe could have been a bit more unique with its trains, Phoenix Rising does sit differently with more substantial seats and an overhead lap bar like Penguin Trek. The relatively low intensity level of this coaster isn't just a great step up into the larger ones, but its seating feels less vulnerable than hanging from Montu, which again helps younger kids and more timid riders when trying to face their fear of larger coasters. Phoenix Rising isn't particularly intense, but it does pull some decent G's throughout its non-inverting layout, and like Penguin Trek, is deceptively fun. While I preferred the old Timbuktu theming, as the area was repainted and rethemed to Pantopia in 2014 with the opening of Falcon's Fury, Phoenix Rising does fit the nebulously exotic and mystical theme of this area, and there are even some banners that showcase different elemental phoenixes. The ride side is framed by a banked turn, which is a minor but visually interesting element, and the queue, while small, continues the desert theme and has mystical junk strewn about. Also, I know that standards are low after Emperor, but this is one of the few SeaWorld coasters that doesn't reuse an old building or station, so I'm just glad that it actually has one. When the coaster dispatches, screen media on the other side of the station also shows the Phoenix awakening and flying off, which results in the coaster leaving the station. And I should also note that the trains do have speakers on board where you hear music and the cry of the Phoenix throughout the ride. If you're in the station after the coaster has dispatched, the shadow of the bird can be seen on the screen as the coaster passes by, which breaks the stained glass and you watch the Phoenix emerge as the train returns to the station. It's not much and not particularly interesting, but it's still certainly more than I expected from this era of the parks. Still, while Phoenix Rising isn't blocking emergency exits kind of bad in terms of operations, I can also see this coaster struggling to meet the demand of park guests. Busch Gardens of course has notoriously slow operations, and while there weren't many people online at all during the preview, I did roughly wait around 20 minutes in the front row line because it takes about 3 minutes for the team to dispatch, and the coaster is only capable of running one train, which takes about a minute to run the layout. Essentially, a line that moves only every 4 minutes will result in some serious wait times if the park is ever busy, and considering that this is a family attraction that the park desperately needs, I anticipate that demands will be pretty high. Overall, my view of Phoenix Rising is positive, because while it could be themed a bit better, It's a surprisingly fun layout and a good step up for many younger riders, and while I suspect that it may attract unreasonable waits, that may be alleviated if Busch Gardens continues making smart investments going forward. At a time when SeaWorld is pretty transparently being squeezed for money beyond its limits by a predatory investment firm, it is surprising to see how well its new family coasters have been executed when my expectations were about as low as they could be. Yes, SeaWorld operations are generally pretty slow, and in the case of Penguin Trek, literally illegal by barricading a fire exit, but overall, these are positive developments for the parks that they premiered in. The theming isn't spectacular, and I'm well aware that if Penguin Trek wasn't reusing the pre-existing building, there would almost be nothing at all, but it's clear that at least some people behind the creative decisions are doing as much as they can with what they're given. SeaWorld parks don't need to be Disney or Universal level in their theming to be enjoyable, but what I have always liked about them is that they were great family parks with notable, thoughtfully placed coasters, and more theming than you would typically find with Six Flags or Cedar Fair. A decade of chaos has changed that, but despite the awful management currently, I can at least appreciate that the company is moving in a positive direction with the right ride type. When SeaWorld debuted Pipeline the surf coaster last year, it only made me more skeptical that its 2024 editions would be positive for their parks. While Pipeline does have a nice water feature and some area theming that is more than I would have expected, an experimental launched stand-up coaster was such an odd choice, and I thought it was chosen because it was cheap. Coaster manufacturers will often sell and design for parks for a lower price when attempting to debut a new coaster model, as it can be a risk for the park, and I highly suspect that this is what happens with Pipeline. However, when it became evident that SeaWorld was doing this yet again, with a launched family coaster with a new train type, and a family inverted coaster with a similar idea and onboard audio, I could see that SeaWorld was trying to build for cheap, and I didn't believe was committed to thoughtfully expanding on their offerings. I do actually think that's somewhat true, at least in terms of not wanting to spend much money, but with both coasters, they were again deceptively fun and were more forceful than I anticipated, which do a great job of working as stepping stones up to the more intense attractions. I really want to love these parks because they have so much potential, but it's hard to overlook a company that has just been so absurdly mismanaged in its operations. SeaWorld and Busch Gardens could fill a niche as family parks with solid rides, lands, animal exhibits, and great coaster collections, but that's just not going to happen when they are providing the Six Flags experience. It's frustrating because these new coasters show what great potential is there, but until SeaWorld stops being choked under an investment firm that doesn't care about the park experience, then these places will never achieve the excellence that they should. If you've managed to experience these new coasters, please let me know what you think. And as always, you can help this video out by just simply leaving a like. If you have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.